Hi, my name is Jon Alpert. I'm the co-founder and co-director of DCTV, Downtown Community TV Center. DCTV was founded in 1972. It was a time of injustice and unrest in the United States, and very specifically in New York City, and even more specifically in our neighborhood. And we were doing different types of community organizing. This was me and my wife, and we were spectacularly unsuccessful. We were fighting for better schools, we were fighting for better housing, we were fighting for better health care, fighting to stop the Vietnam War, and we weren't succeeding in any of that. But when we took one of the first generation of portable video cameras and began making mini documentaries about these conditions, showing them in the street from an old mail truck. Basically, we took two black and white TV sets. I had bought a mail truck at an auction for $5, and that was sort of our traveling movie theater. Things began to change, and they changed really dramatically, and we began to see the power of the media to help improve things in our neighborhood. But we were just two people, we only had one camera, and there were so many things to be done that we decided we wanted to deputize everybody in the neighborhood. So we began offering free classes. Anybody who wanted to use our cameras to try and do social good within the neighborhood, we would let them use our camera, and that started DCTV, and we've grown since then into probably the most honored and most respected community center, certainly in the United States, maybe in the world. You know, when I first came to Cuba, cell phones weren't invented, and I was in my early 20s, and I've been coming back for 5 decades. The first trip I ever made out of the country was to Cuba. It was in 1972 with an early generation black and white video portapack. We had been told by the Cuban diplomats that we knew here in New York City that we would be welcome when we got to Cuba. And we got on a boat, an old sailboat that went from Key West to Havana in the middle of the night. Took 16 hours. And when we got there, we were sort of boat arrested, and we weren't let off the boat. And I could sort of see at the sort of end of this long tunnel, the street and the people walking, and it really made me crazy and made me want to see what was actually happening in Cuba. And I began driving the guys that were guarding us and keeping us on the boat crazy. If Cuba's so great, why don't you let us see it? If Cuba's so wonderful, why don't you let us film it? If Cuba's, they're sort of like this. And so after 3 days, they decided that in order to get rid of us and to get me to shut up, they showed up with these two gigantic old Cadillacs, the type that had the big fins, Cadillac convertibles, the type that we only dreamed about as kids because none of us had families that had monies for Cadillacs. And they drove us around Havana for 3 hours, and they showed us a housing project. They showed us where Hemingway lived, and then they kicked us out. And instead of discouraging us, it only whet our appetite.
Good morning.
Fidel was 53 when we flew to New York together, and he always remembered me, and he was always excited to see me.
I accompanied Fidel to the United Nations in his historic trip. It was 1978 or 79, and interviewed him a number of times over his life. I was able to invade his kitchen and be able to film around in his bedroom as he showed me aspects of his personal life that he never shared with anybody. So I had lots of unusual personal encounters with him up to the time that he died. And I think what's interesting about our film is that it absolutely shows a human side of Fidel, relates to him on an individual personal level that's quite unique and very, very revealing of him. So it's why a lot of people are fascinated with the documentary.
What would you do if you were mayor of New York City, Fidel?
The first thing I would do was to resign.
When you're making a documentary, you need to establish trust between yourself and the person that you're following, because you're invading their personal space. You're asking for them to share things that they don't normally share with other people, and the sort of more intimate and the more unusual the sharing, the better your documentary is going to be. And your eyes need to communicate, and they need to be able to look inside you and trust you. I like to believe that Fidel decided to trust me with something that he never trusted anybody else with, which were these sort of details of capturing his personal life. I think he also respected me because he knew of the community work that we were doing here in New York, using media to try to improve the lives of people in the neighborhood, and also the work that we do with young people, giving them cameras and empowering all sorts of groups that need to be able to tell their story. We have a current project of Americans and Russians with disabilities making films about their lives. It's really, really a nice project. It's called All for One, One for All, after the slogan of the Three Musketeers, the slogan that we sort of all need to embrace if we're going to improve the situation that we live in. And also I'd been to a lot of wars and had put my life on the line in order to film things that other people weren't filming and other people weren't seeing. I thought Fidel respected that.
Nice to see you, Fidel.
You look great!
How you doing? Whoa, still strong.
The most emotional parts of the film were when my friends got old and died. This included all three brothers. I love them. They taught me a lot. They loved me. The visits that we had together and shared were amongst the highlights of both of our lives. I had similar emotional and personal bonds with Fidel. And was fortunate enough, but it was very emotional to see him at the end of his life.
What's happening to Cuba?
Is everything okay?
We've got interfered here.
So I've managed to get myself in trouble filming all over the world. And I've had people try to kill me all over the world. It's been seriously dangerous in many places. It's never been seriously dangerous in Cuba. It's been seriously dangerous in China, seriously dangerous in the Philippines, seriously dangerous in Iraq and Afghanistan. I can list all the places where it was really, really dangerous. I've been detained in Cuba, but I always knew that like in an hour or two they were going to let me go. It's one of the reasons why I was able to push hard in a number of areas. Most recently, when Fidel died and his ashes were being transported across the country, there was a sort of a donut around those ashes of about 100 miles, and you could not penetrate that. I managed to penetrate it and wound up in the actual procession about 6 cars behind Fidel's ashes, and had a wonderful and extremely emotional couple of hours filming and following the ashes until the caravan entered a military base. The doors shut and all these generals looked and said, "Wait a minute, who's this guy and what's he doing here?" And we spent the next 5 or 6 hours at the police station, but in the end they let me go. And not only did they let me go, but when they realized that I was sort of the famous Juanito, who everybody in Cuba knows and likes, they went racing all over town to find me a place to stay because there were no hotel rooms, and got me a takeout dinner, fried shrimp. It was pretty tasty.
So all this stuff going on in Cuba. When I filmed here in 1975, all these shelves were full. I learned many things with you, and I'll see you next time I come back to Cuba, okay?
Okay. Because so much has changed in the past 2 years. I get emails out of the blue from people all over the world. It's one of the really beauties of making a film for Netflix, because it has worldwide distribution in I don't know how many different languages, dozens of languages. And I'm getting letters from Bulgaria, I'm getting letters from Brazil. You contacted me. But most heartening are the emails I get from Cubans. Cubans on the island, Cubans in exile, Cubans who are pro-Castro, Cubans who are anti-Castro. I think I've gotten like 1 or 2 emails from people who didn't like the film, and hundreds of emails from people who basically say that when their kids ask them what the Cuban Revolution was like, they're going to show them the film because they believe that it captures the revolution and its people. So that's pretty cool.